"What do you mean? My account is overdrawn?" I asked, the words laced with a carefully crafted incredulity, a performance I was perfecting in real time. I stared at the screen of my phone, feigning shock, a mirror image of the genuine panic I knew would be twisting Brandon's sister's features on the other end of the line. "That's impossible." Brandon's sister, Chloe, launched into a frantic, high-pitched rant about the rent money Brandon had promised her, rent money he'd sworn he'd transferred, rent money she now desperately needed. "He did what?" I interjected, my voice a model of controlled composure, letting Chloe believe I was only just now absorbing the shockwaves of my husband's catastrophic betrayal. Inside, a cold, grim satisfaction began to bloom. My name is Isla Hayes, and my soon-to-be ex-husband, Brandon, had just become the biggest, most spectacularly misguided financial stake of my life, though decidedly not in the way he so arrogantly assumed. That Sunday morning, when I'd woken to the hollow emptiness of the bed beside me, the silence amplifying the cruel finality of the note left taped to the fridge, it had felt less like a devastating blow and more like a final, definitive confirmation of the inevitable. "Goodbye, Isla." The words, scrawled in his familiar, infuriatingly confident hand, mocked me from the stark white refrigerator door. "Never loved you anyway. Real classy, Brandon." I'm a forensic accountant based in Chicago, and for the last 15 years, my professional life had revolved around meticulously tracking financial fraud, dissecting complex schemes for some of the Midwest's largest corporations. So, when my own husband, my supposedly devoted partner, started exhibiting the telltale signs of meticulously planning his grand escape, his carefully orchestrated vanishing act, 3 months ago, well, let's just say he wasn't exactly dealing with an amateur. He was, in fact, unknowingly waltzing directly into a meticulously crafted trap. The first, almost laughably obvious red flag had been his sudden, almost theatrical interest in our retirement accounts. After years of blissful financial apathy, years of allowing me to manage every aspect of our shared finances, a control I now understood was born not of trust but of calculated convenience, he'd begun peppering me with questions, feigning a newfound concern for our long-term financial security. Then came the furtive, whispered phone calls, conducted in hushed tones in the next room, always abruptly terminated whenever I dared to approach. The unexplained absences, increasingly frequent and vaguely justified. And the telltale way he would instantly minimize or change his computer screen whenever I walked into our home office, classic, textbook signs of someone meticulously constructing a secret life, meticulously planning to bolt, leaving a trail of financial wreckage in their wake. I'd witnessed this pathetic, predictable charade countless times in my professional life, dissecting the financial ruins of countless corporate betrayals. What Brandon, in his arrogant self-assurance, never seemed to grasp was that every subtly suspicious transaction, every furtive hidden purchase, every clumsy attempt to quietly siphon off our shared funds, was not only noticed, but meticulously documented, photographed, and securely sent straight to my lawyer's encrypted server. By the time he'd penned that pathetic, cliché-ridden note, thinking he'd executed the perfect, undetectable escape, I had already preemptively moved the vast majority of our savings to a protected account, flagged all our joint accounts for suspicious activity, and meticulously prepared for every conceivable scenario his predictably panicked mind might conjure. So, when the fraud alerts started flooding my phone that Monday morning, a relentless barrage of digital notifications, I couldn't suppress a small, grim smile. It was a smile devoid of joy, devoid of triumph, but laced with a cold, almost clinical satisfaction. Brandon, in his deluded self-importance, thought he was 10 steps ahead of me, the master manipulator, the cunning escape artist. He had absolutely no idea he was, in reality, blindly stumbling directly into a meticulously constructed trap of his own making, a financial snare woven with his own deceitful threads. The phone continued to buzz incessantly in my hand, a relentless stream of digital confirmations. Transaction declined. Withdrawal attempt failed. Account temporarily frozen. Each notification, each digital ping of Brandon's thwarted attempts, was like a discordant, yet strangely satisfying, piece of music to my ears, a symphony of his spectacular, self-inflicted downfall. My hand, almost instinctively, brushed against the thick manila folder marked, "Just in case." Sitting innocuously on the corner of my desk, a silent testament to my meticulous planning, my unwavering preparedness. It was filled, almost to bursting, with months of painstakingly gathered evidence, a digital and paper trail of Brandon's duplicity, evidence that would not only effectively dismantle his meticulously planned escape, but would, I suspected, utterly obliterate his carefully constructed future. As I listened to his sister's increasingly desperate, increasingly panicked voice on the phone, the tremor in her tone betraying her own complicity, I almost, for a fleeting, almost imperceptible moment, felt a flicker of something akin to pity for him. Almost. You might imagine I was devastated, heartbroken, shattered by the brutal revelation that my husband of 8 years, the man I had shared my life with, my dreams with, had, in the end, never truly loved me. But here's the thing about being a forensic accountant, about spending years dissecting the financial lives of others, about meticulously tracing the hidden trails of deceit and manipulation. You learn to see patterns. You learn to decipher the subtle language of money, the silent confessions whispered in transaction histories and bank statements. People, especially those steeped in self-deception and arrogance, think they're clever, think they're masters of disguise, think they're expertly concealing their tracks when they're hiding things, especially financial things. But money, in its cold, unblinking digital reality, leaves a trail, always. And Brandon, in his clumsy attempts at financial subterfuge, he left breadcrumbs. He left a veritable Hansel and Gretel trail of digital breadcrumbs, leading directly to his exquisitely planned, spectacularly doomed downfall. I met Brandon at a charity gala 6 years ago, a glittering, superficial affair populated by Chicago's well-heeled elite, all posing for photographs and subtly vying for social dominance. He was charming undeniably, successful, or so he convincingly claimed, and he certainly appeared to have his life meticulously together, a carefully curated image of polished competence. He worked, he said, as an investment advisor, a profession that lent itself to an aura of effortless success and financial acumen. He drove a sleek, expensive car, a status symbol carefully chosen to project an image of prosperity. And he spoke, with an almost practiced sincerity, about building a future together, painting a rosy picture of shared ambition and domestic bliss. I was admittedly impressed by his carefully cultivated confidence, his seemingly boundless ambition, his effortless charm. Looking back now, with the cold, clear vision of hindsight, I should have noticed the subtle evasions, the carefully deflected questions about his clients, the almost comical vagueness when he spoke about his past, his professional history. But I was blinded, willingly blinded, by the carefully constructed illusion he presented. The first 3 years were good, or at least I desperately wanted to believe they were. We bought a beautiful, sprawling house in the leafy suburbs of Milwaukee, a picture-perfect image of suburban domesticity. We planned exotic vacations, jetting off to sun-drenched beaches and European capitals, meticulously documenting our seemingly idyllic life on social media. We even, tentatively, began to talk about starting a family, a future filled with the messy, unpredictable joys of parenthood. But even amidst the carefully curated facade of marital bliss, there were always these little things, these subtle dissonances, that didn't quite add up, tiny cracks in the carefully constructed veneer, like how he'd become inexplicably defensive, almost bristling with irritation, whenever I casually inquired about his student loans, a lingering financial obligation he always brushed aside as taken care of, or how he'd smoothly, almost too smoothly, change the subject, redirecting the conversation with practiced ease, whenever I mentioned the idea of meeting his old colleagues, his former professional network. "You don't trust me?" he'd say, his voice laced with wounded innocence, always subtly turning it around on me, casting me in the role of the suspicious, overly controlling partner. "Why do you need to know everything?" he'd protest, his tone shifting to wounded indignation. "Don't you think I can handle my own finances?" Classic manipulation. I'd seen it countless times in my professional life, dissecting the intricate financial deceptions of corporate fraudsters, spotting the telltale signs of emotional leverage being deployed to avoid financial transparency, to conceal hidden agendas. But in my personal life, I let it slide. Because I wanted to believe in us. I wanted to believe in him. That, I now recognized with a chilling clarity, was my first and perhaps most costly mistake. Then came the signs I could no longer, in good conscience, ignore, the red flags waving with increasing urgency, demanding attention. Last Christmas, a holiday season usually steeped in shared traditions and intertwined finances, he'd insisted, with an almost unsettling vehemence, on separate accounts for our holiday spending. "It'll be more romantic," he declared, his voice dripping with insincere sentimentality, "if we surprise each other." But forensic accountants are trained to see beneath the surface, to discern the hidden motives behind seemingly innocuous actions. And forensic accountant Isla Hayes, noticed the credit card statements he thought he'd so cleverly hidden, tucked away in the back of his sock drawer, revealing a disturbing pattern of purchases at high-end jewelry stores, extravagant boutiques, jewelry I never received, gifts that never materialized. The weekend business trips that didn't quite align with any industry conferences I could find in his purported field, the vague itineraries, the suspiciously untraceable hotel bookings, the mysterious, late-night calls from unknown numbers, calls that always, conveniently, went straight to voicemail whenever I happened to be within earshot, calls he'd dismiss with a casual wave of his hand as wrong numbers, or telemarketers. Most wives, faced with this mounting pile of circumstantial evidence, might have confronted their husbands immediately, demanding answers, initiating a tearful, emotionally charged confrontation. But I'm not most wives. I'm Isla Hayes, forensic accountant. Instead of emotional outbursts and accusatory confrontations, I opted for meticulous, methodical investigation. I started quietly pulling bank statements, meticulously tracking transactions, building a case, brick by digital brick, piece by damning piece. Every time he thought he was expertly covering his tracks, expertly erasing his digital footprints, he was, in reality, unwittingly providing me with even more damning evidence, further solidifying the airtight case I was silently constructing against him. I watched with a detached, almost clinical interest, as he slowly, clumsily, tried to siphon off funds from our joint accounts, thinking, in his arrogant delusion, that I was blissfully oblivious to his increasingly desperate, increasingly transparent maneuvers. "You're working late again?" he'd ask, feigning a concerned husband's solicitude, his eyes betraying a flicker of something darker, something colder, as I sat at my computer, ostensibly immersed in spreadsheets and financial reports. "Just catching up on some cases," I'd reply, my voice carefully neutral, betraying nothing, not mentioning that the most compelling, most personal case I was currently working on was, in fact, the breaking point, the moment when suspicion solidified into chilling certainty, came 3 weeks ago. I was working late, genuinely late this time, immersed in the complex financial web of a particularly intricate corporate fraud case, when my colleague, Susan, rushed to my desk, her face pale, her expression bordering on frantic. She was clutching her phone like a lifeline, her knuckles white against the sleek black casing. "Isla," she said, her voice shaking slightly, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and disbelief. You need to see this." My stomach dropped, a sudden, sickening lurch of premonition. "See what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, a cold dread creeping up my spine. "I was reviewing the Thompson case files," Susan stammered, her breath catching in her throat. When I found something, it's about Brandon." My blood ran cold, a sudden, icy paralysis gripping me. As I looked at her phone screen, the fluorescent office lights reflecting harshly off the glass. There it was, stark and undeniable, Brandon's name, emblazoned in bold print, linked to a series of suspiciously similar transactions, eerily familiar patterns, in a corporate fraud case we were actively investigating. Not as a witness, not as a victim, but as a person of interest. The same subtle anomalies, the same telltale patterns I'd been meticulously tracking in our personal accounts, were now glaringly, damningly showing up in his professional dealings, his carefully constructed public life. He wasn't just planning to leave me, to abscond with our savings, to vanish into the anonymity of a new city. He was running from something much bigger, something far more legally precarious, something that was about to bring his carefully constructed world crashing down around him. "There's more," Susan whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the office air conditioning, scrolling slowly through the damning digital documents on her phone. "He's been named in 3 other fraud investigations. Different states. Different names." She paused, her voice trembling slightly. "But the same modus operandi." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of horror and sympathy. "He finds successful women, marries them, then disappears. With their money." She paused again, the silence hanging heavy between us. "The last one was in Phoenix, just before he moved to Milwaukee. The pieces, fragmented and disparate until this moment, suddenly clicked into place with chilling, devastating clarity. The charm, the manufactured secrecy, the sudden, almost theatrical interest in our finances. It was all part of his meticulously crafted pattern, a well-rehearsed script he'd perfected over years, over countless victims. I wasn't his wife. I was his next target, his latest mark in a long, sickeningly predictable con. And he, in his supreme arrogance, had no idea that his latest, most meticulously chosen mark was someone who specialized in catching people exactly like him. That night, after Brandon, blissfully unaware of the digital noose tightening around him, finally fell asleep beside me, I sat alone in our darkened kitchen until dawn, the silence amplifying the frantic beating of my own heart. I went through everything, every memory, every conversation, every subtle red flag I'd so willingly ignored, now viewed with fresh, brutally clear eyes. The loving husband act, the carefully calibrated charm, the insidious, almost imperceptible manipulation, the subtle, persistent way he'd slowly, systematically tried to isolate me from my friends, from my family, from my own support network. It was all sickeningly, devastatingly clear now. I found myself laughing then, a low, hollow sound that echoed in the pre-dawn quiet, not because it was funny, not even remotely, but because of the sheer, breathtaking irony of it all. He'd picked the wrong woman to con. He'd chosen, unknowingly, to try and deceive someone who had dedicated her life to exposing deception. I spent the next 3 weeks meticulously preparing, silently orchestrating my counterattack, a complex, multi-layered strategy designed to dismantle his carefully constructed world. Every morning, I'd kiss him goodbye, a practiced, almost theatrical performance of marital affection, like nothing was wrong, like I was still the trusting, oblivious wife he so desperately needed me to be. Every night, I'd listen patiently to his increasingly elaborate, increasingly transparent lies about work, about client meetings, about investment opportunities, all while meticulously documenting every suspicious transaction, every subtle financial maneuver, every digital footprint he so carelessly left behind. I quietly, strategically moved the vast majority of our savings into a separate, protected account, contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, laying out my meticulously compiled evidence, and began gathering additional documentation, evidence that would not only definitively protect me from his financial predation, but would, I hoped, help his previous victims, his countless, nameless casualties. "You seem different lately," he said one night, his gaze suddenly, unexpectedly intense, studying my face with an unnerving scrutiny. "Is everything okay?" He was probing, testing the waters, his con artist's instincts subtly alerted, sensing a shift in the carefully calibrated dynamic of our relationship. I smiled, a small, tight, almost predatory smile that he, thankfully, didn't seem to fully register in the dim evening light, thinking about the elaborate trap I'd so meticulously set, about how his own arrogance, his own unwavering self-belief, would ultimately be his downfall. "Just tired from work?" I replied, my voice carefully casual, dismissive. "You know how it gets, this time of year." He nodded sympathetically, his brow furrowing with feigned concern, probably thinking, in his self-absorbed world, that I was simply working hard to earn even more money for him to steal, to siphon off, to disappear with. If he'd paid just a little closer attention, if he'd truly seen me, truly registered the subtle shifts in my demeanor, he might have noticed the subtle, almost imperceptible gleam in my eye, the quiet, steely glint of determination, the silent promise of retribution. The gleam that said, without words, I know exactly what you're planning, and you have no idea what's coming. But con men, especially those as deeply entrenched in their own self-deception as Brandon, never truly think they'll be the ones getting conned. They operate under a fundamental delusion, a deeply ingrained belief in their own superior intellect, their own unassailable cunning. And that's the thing about people who make a living betraying others, about those who build their empires on lies and manipulation. They never, in their arrogant blindness, truly expect to be the ones getting played. The morning after Brandon disappeared, leaving behind his pathetic, cliché-ridden farewell note, his meticulously planned escape began unfolding, ironically, exactly as he'd expected, exactly according to his meticulously crafted, and ultimately deeply flawed, script. The first call came, predictably, from our bank, a polite, almost apologetic voice informing me of unusual account activity. Multiple attempted withdrawals, maxed-out credit cards, a flurry of frantic, ultimately futile financial maneuvers. The second was from his sister, Chloe, her voice hysterical with manufactured desperation about the borrowed rent money. The sob story she'd so convincingly spun for me just weeks earlier, now recycled, repurposed, and directed at his latest victim, me. The third, however, was the one that truly resonated, the call that sent a jolt of cold, grim satisfaction through me, confirming the devastating scope of his deception. It was from a woman named Rachel Clark, calling from Phoenix, her voice hesitant, tinged with a mixture of anger and weary resignation, asking, with a trembling uncertainty, if I knew where her husband was. Her husband. The words hit me with the unexpected force of a bucket of ice water. A sudden, chilling drenching of reality. I'm sorry, I stammered, my voice catching in my throat. A sudden, unexpected wave of nausea rising within me. What did you say? I gripped my phone tighter, my knuckles whitening, sinking heavily into a kitchen chair, the polished wood suddenly feeling cold and unforgiving beneath my fingertips. Brandon Murphy, Rachel explained, her voice tight with barely suppressed anger, a low, simmering fury just beneath the surface calm. He's still legally my husband. She paused, drawing a shaky breath. He'd disappeared. With my savings. 3 years ago. Another pause, heavier, more laden with unspoken pain. I've been tracking him ever since. A grim smile, devoid of humor, devoid of any genuine amusement, tugged at the corners of my lips, a cold, almost predatory satisfaction blooming in my chest. Actually, I said, my voice now regaining its clinical composure. Here, he went by Brandon Thompson. Another pause, a beat of deliberate, dramatic irony. And you're not going to believe this, but I've been expecting your call. Over the next hour, Rachel and I, two strangers united by a shared experience of betrayal, compared notes, piecing together the devastatingly predictable puzzle of Brandon's life. His lies, his elaborate con, same practiced charming smile, same fabricated investment advisor story, same meticulously rehearsed pattern of slowly, subtly draining accounts, isolating his victims, and then, ultimately, disappearing without a trace, leaving behind a trail of financial and emotional wreckage. But this time, I explained to Rachel, her voice crackling with a mixture of disbelief and dawning hope on the other end of the line. There was one crucial, game-changing difference. Me. I've gathered enough evidence. I told her, my voice resonating with quiet, steely determination. Enough to bring him down. But, I added, a strategic plan already forming in my mind. I need your help to catch him. For good. Just then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed again, a text message notification flashing across the screen. It was from Brandon. I'm sorry. The words, stark and pathetic, mocked me from the digital display. Can we talk? Just one last time? Perfect. He was following the script, adhering to the predictable pattern I'd meticulously discovered in Rachel's case files, reaching out after the initial disappearance, attempting to manipulate his way back into my life, back into my trust, back into my bank accounts, seeking one last, desperate chance to access any remaining untapped funds. I showed the text to my lawyer, Sarah, who was already meticulously preparing our counterattack, her legal mind already several steps ahead, anticipating Brandon's every predictable move. "Let's set the trap," she said, her eyes gleaming with a hunter's focused intensity, a predator scenting its prey. "Let's give him his one last time." I agreed to meet Brandon at a coffee shop downtown, a neutral, public space, meticulously chosen for its strategic advantages. When I arrived, he was already there, hunched over a small table in the back corner, looking appropriately, theatrically, remorseful. His eyes were red-rimmed, his clothes slightly rumpled, his posture radiating a carefully constructed air of defeated vulnerability. The perfect, pathetic picture of a man who'd made a terrible, regrettable mistake. "Isla," he began, his voice a low, gravelly whisper, reaching for my hand across the small table, his touch feeling suddenly, viscerally repellent. "I'm so sorry." He launched into his rehearsed script, a carefully crafted performance of remorse and desperation. "I've been going through some things, dealing with some bad investments. I panicked. I pulled my hand away, recoiling from his touch as if burned, playing my part, mirroring his carefully constructed performance of vulnerability with my own carefully calibrated performance of wounded hurt. "How much trouble are you in, Brandon?" I asked, my voice cold, clinical, devoid of emotion. His eyes lit up then, just a flicker, a momentary flash of avarice in his otherwise carefully constructed mask of remorse. But I caught it, registered it, filed it away as further confirmation of his unwavering, irredeemable deceit. He thought, in his arrogance, that I was falling for it, that his carefully crafted performance was working, that I was about to offer him a lifeline. "About $200,000, he confessed, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, leaning closer, invading my personal space, his desperation radiating off him in waves. "But," he added, his voice suddenly regaining a flicker of its earlier, practiced confidence, "I have a plan to fix everything. I just need access to our emergency fund." I pretended to consider it, my expression carefully neutral, betraying nothing, watching him squirm under my unwavering gaze, dissecting his every micro-expression, every subtle shift in body language, every telltale sign of his ingrained deception. "The emergency fund," I repeated slowly, deliberately, each word a carefully chosen weapon. "Right? The one you tried to empty yesterday." His face, moments before radiating a flicker of false hope, fell then, visibly, audibly, like a dropped mask, the carefully constructed facade of remorse cracking under the weight of my words. For just a second, a fleeting, almost imperceptible second, pure, unadulterated panic flickered across his features, the raw, naked fear of exposure. But he was a practiced con artist, a master manipulator, and he quickly, expertly recovered, forcing his features back into a semblance of wounded vulnerability, his eyes pleading, desperate. That was a mistake," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper, his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble audibly around him. "I wasn't thinking clearly. But if you help me now," he pleaded, his voice rising again, taking on a desperate edge. I promise to." "To what, Brandon?" I interrupted, my voice now hardening, the pretense of wounded vulnerability dissolving, replaced by a cold, unwavering steel. "To disappear again? To resurface in another city under another name with another unsuspecting victim? Or to stick around just long enough to drain my accounts completely, to leave me financially and emotionally ruined, just like you did to Rachel in Phoenix?" The color drained completely from his face then, leaving it ashen, gray, deathly pale. For the first time since I'd met him, since I'd fallen so willingly, so blindly, for his carefully constructed lies, Brandon Thompson or Murphy or Roberts or whatever his real, constantly shifting name actually was, looked genuinely, utterly shocked. The carefully constructed mask of charm, of confidence, of practiced manipulation, finally, irrevocably shattered. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a dawning horror, a chilling realization of the depth of his miscalculation, the magnitude of his impending downfall. "You? No," he whispered, the words barely audible, a strangled gasp escaping his lips, his carefully constructed world collapsing into dust around him. "You know, Brandon," I continued, my voice now clear, cold, utterly devoid of emotion, sliding the thick manila folder marked Brandon Thompson case file across the table, the sound of the folder hitting the polished wood echoing unervingly in the suddenly silent coffee shop. "The funny thing is, if you'd done your research, if you'd bothered to look just a little bit deeper, just a little bit closer, you might have realized that stealing from a forensic accountant wasn't your smartest move." Just then, as if on cue, as if orchestrated by some unseen, perfectly timed director, two figures in dark suits approached our table, their movements deliberate, their expressions unreadable, their presence radiating an undeniable aura of authority. FBI agents. I stood up slowly, deliberately, straightening my jacket, a small, grim smile playing at the corners of my lips. "Oh, and Brandon," I added, my voice calm, almost conversational, betraying not a flicker of triumph, not a hint of vengeful satisfaction. "You might want to call a lawyer. A good one." As Brandon, his face now a mask of stunned disbelief, was being led away by the FBI agents, his carefully constructed world crumbling audibly with each step, my phone lit up again, a familiar ringtone announcing an incoming call from Susan. Her timing, as always, couldn't have been more impeccably perfect. "We've got him," she said, her voice ringing with undisguised triumph, a wave of exhilaration echoing in her tone. "The team just finished analyzing those offshore accounts you flagged. Brandon isn't just running a marriage con, Isla. He's been operating a massive Ponzi scheme. We're looking at fraud in the millions." I watched through the coffee shop window, the morning sunlight glinting harshly off the chrome of the federal vehicle, as Brandon, his shoulders slumped, his head bowed, was placed in the back seat, the door closing with a definitive, almost symbolic thud. He looked small now, diminished, utterly insignificant, nothing like the confident, charming man who had so arrogantly believed he could outsmart me, outmaneuver the system, outrun his own meticulously constructed web of lies. "How many victims?" I asked Susan, my voice barely above a whisper, already knowing, instinctively, that the answer would be ugly, devastatingly extensive. 23, Susan replied, her voice grim, reciting the stark statistics. "So far, spanning 5 states, 12 marriages, all to successful women. In finance." She paused, drawing a breath. "But here's the kicker, Isla. He was planning something bigger. Much bigger." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "We found evidence of a new investment firm he was setting up. Thompson and Associates. He was going to use your credentials and your reputation to lure in high-net-worth clients." A chilling wave of understanding washed over me, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with horrifying precision. I thought about all those late nights when he'd casually, almost too casually, inquire about my cases, feigning a supportive husband's interest in my demanding professional life. He wasn't being supportive. He was being calculating. He was gathering information, meticulously planning to exploit my hard-earned professional reputation, my respected credentials, for his most audacious, most devastating scam yet. "The irony," I said, a hollow, humorless laugh escaping my lips, "is that if he hadn't gotten so greedy, if he'd just stuck to his usual small-time marriage con, he might have gotten away." Again, I shook my head slowly, a weary resignation washing over me. "But he just had to go bigger. That's not even the best part," Susan continued, her voice now laced with a grim, almost gallows humor. "Remember that country club membership he insisted on last year?" I nodded, a faint flicker of a memory surfacing. The subtle pressure he'd applied, the veiled insistence on joining an exclusive club, ostensibly for networking, for business development. "Turns out," Susan continued, a dry chuckle escaping her lips, "he was using it to meet his next target." Another pause, pregnant with dark irony. Caroline Mitchell, the hedge fund manager. Caroline, my friend, my colleague, my confidant. He was already laying the groundwork for his next disappearing act. I recalled all those Sunday golf games, those late-night networking events, the carefully constructed facade of a devoted husband diligently building his professional network. While he was playing the devoted husband at home, meticulously weaving his web of lies around me, he was simultaneously, and with breathtaking audacity, setting up his next victim, his next financial conquest. "Let me guess," I said to Susan, a grim smile spreading across my face, a chilling understanding dawning. "Caroline gave you access to all their private conversations? Every email, every text, every recorded conversation in the club lounge. He literally handed us a blueprint of his entire operation, Isla, while trying to seduce her." Susan's voice was now laced with a mixture of professional admiration and stunned disbelief. "The guy practically wrote our case for us." I couldn't help but laugh then, a genuine unrestrained laugh, tinged with a mixture of relief, catharsis, and a profound, almost surreal sense of irony. Brandon had spent months meticulously planning his elaborate exit, thinking, in his supreme arrogance, that he was the smartest person in the room, the ultimate manipulator, the untouchable con man. Meanwhile, every single person he thought he was so expertly manipulating me, Rachel, Caroline, Susan, the entire FBI Financial Crimes Unit, had been working together, silently, strategically, meticulously building an airtight, utterly inescapable case against him. "Have you heard from his sister?" I asked Susan, the memory of Chloe's frantic, theatrical call from earlier that morning still echoing in my mind. "Chloe, Kelly, whatever her real name is. That's another interesting thread," Susan replied, her voice taking on a conspiratorial tone. "Turns out, she's not his sister at all." Another beat of silence, another layer of deception unpeeled. "She's an accomplice. They've been running this scam together for years." She paused, the implications hanging heavy in the air. "She plays the desperate sister to explain why he needs to borrow money urgently, right before he disappears." Another pause. "She's being picked up in Chicago as we speak." I sat back in my chair, taking it all in, the sheer scope of Brandon's deception breathtaking, almost unbelievable. But so, too, was his staggering, almost comical blindness, his utter inability to see beyond his own self-constructed reality. He'd been so laser-focused on meticulously maintaining his elaborate web of lies, so consumed by his own arrogant self-belief, that he'd never even noticed the intricate digital trap slowly, methodically closing around him, tightening with each meticulously documented transaction, each carelessly whispered lie. "One more thing," Susan added, her voice now laced with a final, almost triumphant note. "We found his real identity." She paused, drawing breath. "His name isn't Brandon Thompson or Murphy. It's Brandon Roberts." Another pause, a final, devastating revelation. "And he's been wanted for fraud in Canada since 2015. I smiled then, a genuine, unrestrained smile, a smile of pure, unadulterated satisfaction, thinking about the massive case file waiting on my desk, the mountain of evidence I had so meticulously compiled, the digital noose now irrevocably tightened around Brandon Roberts's deceitful neck. "Well," I murmured softly to myself, a quiet pronouncement of justice served. "Brandon Roberts, welcome to your worst nightmare." I was just about to gather my things, to head back to the office, to finally, officially, begin the long, arduous process of untangling the financial wreckage of Brandon's elaborate con, when my phone buzzed again, another text message notification flashing across the screen. This time, the number was unknown, unfamiliar. My fingers hovered over the screen hesitantly, a sudden, inexplicable prickle of unease tracing its way up my spine. I opened the message, my breath catching in my throat, a sudden chill descending despite the warm afternoon sun streaming through the coffee shop window. "You think you're clever." The words, stark and menacing, jumped out from the screen, a digital threat delivered with chilling, anonymous precision. But you have no idea what's coming. Another line break. Check your email. The message was followed, almost instantaneously, by an email notification. My heart pounded against my ribs, a sudden visceral surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. I opened the email, my fingers trembling slightly, and stared in stunned disbelief at the contents. Detailed photos. Photos of me with my family, taken surreptitiously, from a distance, seemingly over weeks, months even. Photos documenting my daily routines, my morning coffee runs, my evening walks in the park. Even shots through my home windows, intimate, invasive glimpses into my private life. My sanctuary violated, my sense of security shattered. A cold, visceral chill ran down my spine, not from fear, not precisely, but from a white-hot surge of pure, unadulterated anger. Brandon had hired someone to watch me, to intimidate me, to threaten me. Even now, even in handcuffs, even facing federal prison, he was still trying to exert control, still trying to manipulate, still trying to terrorize. I forwarded everything immediately to Susan, to Sarah, my lawyer, my fingers flying across the keyboard, my mind racing, adrenaline sharpening my focus, amplifying my resolve. Then, my hand trembling only slightly now, I made a call, direct and unwavering, to the FBI agent in charge of Brandon's rapidly expanding, increasingly complex case. Agent Morrison. Agent Morrison, I stated, my voice calm, controlled, betraying nothing of the cold fury simmering beneath the surface. We've got another player in the game. Already on it, Ms. Hayes, she replied instantly, her voice crisp, professional, radiating an aura of quiet competence that mirrored my own. The photos were sent from an IP address we've been monitoring. James Foster. She paused, a beat of grim recognition in her tone. Brandon's former cellmate. From a brief, unfortunate stint in Phoenix. He's been working as Brandon's muscle, threatening victims who get too close to exposing the scheme. A chilling wave of understanding washed over me. I thought of Rachel Clark, of her weary resignation, her years-long silence, her hesitation to come forward. Was this why she'd waited so long? Was this the kind of fear Brandon Roberts, the con man, the manipulator, the fraudster, instilled in his victims? Where is he now? I asked Agent Morrison, my voice low, urgent. That's the thing, she replied, her voice suddenly taking on a sharper, more urgent edge. We can't locate him, but he's probably... Agent Morrison stopped mid-sentence, her voice abruptly cutting off, replaced by the urgent, rapid-fire clicking of computer keys. Hold on, she said, her voice strained, tense. There's movement on one of Brandon's frozen accounts. Another pause, longer this time, the silence stretching, pregnant with unspoken tension. Someone's trying to access it. From inside your house. My house. The words echoed in my mind. A sudden, chilling realization dawning. Inside my house, where I'd left my laptop open, unlocked on my desk, in my home office, carelessly assuming it was secure, safe, inviolable. I called Rachel immediately, my heart pounding against my ribs, a sudden, icy fear gripping me for the first time since this whole terrifying ordeal had begun. Rachel, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, urgent, strained. Is everything okay there? We have a situation, she whispered back, her voice tight with panic, barely audible above a background noise of muffled sounds, of hushed tension. Kelly's here. Kelly, the fake sister, the accomplice, the one who was supposed to be in custody in Chicago hundreds of miles away. She must have had a key. She's trying to access Brandon's accounts. From your computer, Kelly, in my house. Now, my mind raced, adrenaline surging through my veins, sharpening my focus, amplifying my awareness. The pieces clicked into place, the horrifying, terrifying puzzle suddenly complete. This wasn't just a random break-in. This was orchestrated. This was planned. This was calculated. Rachel, I said, my voice now firm, clear, cutting through the rising panic. Get out of there. Now. Kelly's not working. Alone. I heard a sudden, sharp crash in the background, the shattering of glass, the distinct sound of something heavy being thrown, followed by Rachel's sharp intake of breath, a choked gasp of fear. Too late, she whispered, her voice barely audible, strained with terror. Foster's here too. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of adrenaline. But my mind, strangely, remained clear, focused, almost preternaturally calm. This, I realized with a chilling certainty, was exactly the kind of desperate, last-ditch move I'd anticipated, the predictable escalation of a cornered predator, the final, panicked gamble of a con man facing exposure. Rachel, I said, my voice calm, steady, projecting a confidence I didn't entirely feel. Remember what we discussed, the plan, the contingency, the meticulously crafted countermeasure. It's time. Through the phone, amidst the muffled sounds of struggle and rising panic, I heard Rachel's voice, surprisingly calm, surprisingly steady, cutting through the chaos. Hey, Kelly, she said, her voice clear, carrying a quiet, almost unnerving confidence. Before you do anything stupid, you might want to look at what's on that screen. I smiled then, a small, grim smile of grim satisfaction, knowing exactly what they were seeing, what they were about to witness on my laptop screen, the carefully constructed trap about to spring shut. Every file, every account, every piece of damning evidence wasn't just stored on my laptop, vulnerable to their desperate grasp. It was being live-streamed, in real time, directly to the FBI's secure servers. Every keystroke, every mouse click, every frantic attempt at data retrieval meticulously recorded, digitally preserved, legally irrefutable. Plus, the whole house, unbeknownst to Kelly and Foster, was under discreet, professional surveillance, every room, every hallway, every shadowed corner, carefully monitored, patiently observed, with Agent Morrison and a tactical response team station just blocks away, waiting for my signal, waiting for the inevitable and now finally imminent moment to move in. It's over, Kelly, I heard Rachel say, her voice now ringing with a quiet, almost triumphant certainty. Look outside. The sudden, piercing wail of sirens filled the background, escalating rapidly, filling the air with the unmistakable sound of approaching law enforcement, the imminent arrival of justice. FBI agents swarmed my house, a rapid, coordinated response, a silent, efficient force descending upon Hemlock Lane. Within minutes, both Kelly and Foster, Brandon's desperate, misguided accomplices, were in custody, their panicked, futile escape attempts thwarted before they even truly began. And Rachel, my unexpected ally, my sister in survival, was safe. I drove home through the now-twilight streets, the flashing lights of emergency vehicles still pulsing in the distance, to find Agent Morrison waiting for me on my front porch, her expression a mixture of professional admiration and quiet amusement. Quite a performance, Ms. Hayes, she said, a faint smile playing at the corners of her lips. You knew they'd try something like this? I nodded slowly, a weary sigh escaping my lips. People like Brandon, Kelly, and Foster, I replied, my voice low, reflecting on the predictable patterns of criminal desperation. They always get desperate at the end. They're so used to being in control, to manipulating every situation to their advantage, that they simply can't handle losing it. I looked at my house, now officially a crime scene, the yellow police tape stark against the manicured lawn, the once familiar space now feeling strangely violated, irrevocably tainted. I just had to make them think they had one last chance to win. Agent Morrison nodded, her gaze sweeping over the scene, a professional assessment of the aftermath of the attempted break-in. Well, she said, turning back to me, a glint of professional satisfaction in her eyes. With this attempted break-in, and the threats, we can add witness intimidation and conspiracy charges to their rapidly expanding list. She smiled then, a genuine, appreciative smile. I'd say, Ms. Hayes, your trap worked perfectly. I thought about Brandon, sitting alone in his sterile, unforgiving cell, probably still, even now, in his delusional self-importance, believing he could somehow, miraculously, talk his way out of this, outmaneuver the system, con his way to freedom. He had absolutely no idea, I realized with a cold, grim satisfaction, that his desperate, panicked final move, his ill-conceived attempt at intimidation and data retrieval, had just inadvertently given us, the FBI, the prosecution, his countless victims, everything we needed to ensure he'd never ever scam anyone again. 2 months later, I sat in the hushed, solemn courtroom, watching Brandon's carefully constructed world finally, irrevocably, crumble around him. Gone was the practiced charming smile, the confident swagger, the aura of effortless self-assurance, replaced by a stark, naked look of utter defeat, a hollow-eyed despair that no amount of manipulation could mask. As the judge, her voice resonating with cold, judicial authority, read out his sentence, the weight of his crimes finally, definitively crushing him. "Brandon Roberts," she declared, the words echoing through the silent courtroom, "for multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and witness intimidation. This court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison." I caught his eye as they led him away, his shackles clinking softly in the oppressive silence. For a fleeting, almost imperceptible moment, his carefully constructed mask slipped completely, and I saw, for the first time, the raw, unadulterated panic beneath the surface bravado, the chilling emptiness behind the practiced charm. The man who'd so casually, so cruelly, scrawled "never loved you anyway" on a note in my fridge, now faced a future where love, or the lack thereof, was the very least of his concerns. Kelly and Foster didn't fare much better. Both, facing overwhelming evidence and the crushing weight of federal charges, took plea deals, their carefully constructed facade of loyalty to Brandon dissolving under pressure. But they'd still serve significant time, years stripped from their lives, a stark consequence of their complicity in Brandon's elaborate web of deceit. As part of their plea agreements, they provided damning evidence against Brandon's entire network, meticulously detailing his international operations, exposing a vast, interconnected web of scams spanning 3 countries. Rachel sat beside me in the courtroom, her hand finding mine, squeezing it gently, a silent acknowledgement of shared trauma, shared triumph, shared sisterhood forged in the crucible of Brandon's betrayal. As Brandon's victims, my unexpected sisters in survival, stood one by one to share their impact statements, their voices trembling yet resolute. Each woman told a strikingly similar story of calculated deception, financial devastation, and profound emotional betrayal. But each story, too, ended with the same unwavering note of triumph, of hard-won resilience, of defiant empowerment. We'd not only gotten justice, a legal victory in a cold, impersonal courtroom. We'd gotten something far more profound, far more personal, far more enduring. We'd gotten our power back. After the sentencing, Agent Morrison approached me, a genuine smile lighting up her usually professional, carefully composed features. "The Bureau," she said, her voice now warm, almost inviting, "could really use someone with your skills, Ms. Hayes. Have you ever considered consulting for us?" I thought about all the other Brandons out there, lurking in the shadows, preying on unsuspecting victims, expertly weaving their webs of deceit. All the scammers, the manipulators, the financial predators who thought they were too clever, too cunning, too untouchable to ever get caught. A new sense of purpose, a quiet, steely determination, began to solidify within me. "You know what?" I said to Agent Morrison, a genuine smile finally, truly, reaching my eyes. "I think I'd like that. Yeah. I really think I would." As I walked out of the courthouse into the bright, almost blinding Milwaukee sunshine, the weight of months of fear, of anxiety, of carefully suppressed anger, seemed to lift from my shoulders, dissolving into the crisp afternoon air. I felt lighter than I had in years, unbound, unburdened, finally, truly, free. Brandon, in his arrogance, in his calculated cruelty, thought he'd destroyed me, shattered me beyond repair. But he'd only, inadvertently, made me stronger. And now, stepping out into the sunlight, I had a new mission, a new purpose, a new, fiercely determined resolve. Ensuring that Brandon Roberts, the con man who thought he was untouchable, would be the very last con man to ever underestimate a woman with a talent for numbers and an unwavering, unshakable mind for justice. 6 months after Brandon's sentencing, I stood at a podium in a packed conference room at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division in Milwaukee, the fluorescent lights reflecting harshly off the polished surface of the lectern. Behind me, a massive presentation screen detailed what they now officially called the Thompson case. Though, of course, Thompson wasn't his real name, and, I realized with a quiet sense of liberation, wasn't mine anymore either. I'd legally taken back my maiden name, Hayes, wanting absolutely nothing, not even a name, to do with any of Brandon Roberts' countless aliases, his fabricated identities, his carefully constructed lies. The modern con artist? I told the room full of attentive FBI agents and financial analysts, my voice ringing with quiet authority, with hard-won experience. Doesn't use a gun. They use trust, manipulation, and technology. I paused, letting my words sink in, my gaze sweeping over the focused faces before me. But, I added, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing at the corners of my lips, they all leave a trail. You just have to know where to look. The forensic accounting program I had developed in collaboration with the FBI, meticulously designed to track and dismantle complex financial scams, was already showing remarkable results. 3 major romance scam rings, international operations spanning continents, had been busted in the past month alone, their intricate financial webs unraveling under the relentless scrutiny of my program, my team, my methodology. Rachel Clark, my unexpected ally, my sister in survival, had become one of our most valuable consultants, her first-hand experience as a victim of Brandon's con providing invaluable insights into how these predators chose their targets, how they meticulously crafted their lies, how they exploited the vulnerabilities of their unsuspecting victims. After the presentation, as the agents and analysts buzzed with excited conversation, a renewed sense of purpose filling the room, I checked my phone to find a text message from Susan. Another victim of Brandon's, the message read, has been located. In Vancouver. Unlike the rest of us, Susan's message continued. This latest victim, a woman named Elena, had lost everything. Her house, her savings, her small business, all meticulously siphoned off by Brandon Roberts' insidious con. But this time, Susan's message concluded, her tone laced with a quiet, almost triumphant satisfaction. We could help her recover what was stolen. The forensic team, working tirelessly, had finally cracked Brandon's heavily encrypted digital files, revealing a complex network of hidden accounts, offshore holdings, untraceable assets he'd stashed away all over the world, a digital treasure trove of ill-gotten gains, now ripe for reclamation. I thought back to that bleak Sunday morning, months ago now, when I'd found his cruel, dismissive note taped to my refrigerator. The 5 pathetic words he'd scrawled in a final, desperate attempt to break me, to diminish me, to crush my spirit. Never loved you anyway. Instead, I realized, a small, almost grateful smile touching my lips, he'd inadvertently given me a gift. A devastating, painful gift, yes, but a gift nonetheless. The chance to fight back. The chance to help others, countless others, fight back against people like him, against the predators, the manipulators, the con men who preyed on trust, on vulnerability, on the fundamental human desire for connection and love. My new apartment, sleek and minimalist, overlooked the vast expanse of Lake Michigan, the water stretching out to the horizon, shimmering under the evening sun. As I sat on my balcony that evening, the cool lake breeze on my face, a quiet, almost amused smile played at the corners of my lips. Brandon, in his arrogant, self-serving life, had spent his days, his years, meticulously taking things from strong, successful women, leaving a trail of emotional and financial devastation in his wake. But in the end, in a twist of ironic justice, he'd inadvertently created something powerful, something enduring, something far greater than himself. A network of survivors, a sisterhood forged in the crucible of betrayal turned warriors, all united, all fiercely dedicated, to taking down men like him, to preventing future victims, to reclaiming justice, one meticulously documented transaction, one carefully constructed counter-operation, one hard-won victory at a time. Sometimes I mused, gazing out at the vast, shimmering expanse of the lake. The best revenge isn't just surviving, it's thriving. And sometimes it's using your pain, your betrayal, your hard-won knowledge to build something stronger, something better, something that truly makes a difference in the world.